4:58 a.m. at East Valley Penitentiary. Darius Cole hadn't slept. He hadn't even tried. The steel bed frame pressed against his spine like a reminder. This place was never meant for rest. Sitting cross-legged on the icy floor, Darius leaned his back against the chipped wall and closed his eyes. Somewhere in his memory, he heard the distant pluck of guitar strings, C major to D minor, notes he used to teach neighborhood kids before the world labeled him a menace. The loudspeaker buzzed. Cole 91,703, on your feet. Sergeant Willis, stocky with eyes like stale coffee, unlocked the cell door. 2 correctional officers shadowed him, shackles in hand. Darius stood slowly. At 61, his back ached in new ways each morning, but he moved with the care of a man who knew sudden motion could get him killed. As the cuffs clicked shut, Willis muttered, "Warden's waiting in intake." State court sent something overnight. Darius raised an eyebrow. At this hour? No idea. Orders came through an hour ago. They marched him through silent corridors reeking of bleach and regret. Somewhere down H-Wing, a voice hummed a gospel hymn, broken and raw. Darius caught a word, freedom, and felt it hook something in his chest. The intake room was gray, spare, 1 table, 2 chairs, and Warden Lynn, sharp-suited with a stare, honed by 3 decades in corrections. "Mr. Cole," she said, motioning for him to sit. "The state has moved forward. A retrial's been approved. Jury selection starts in 6 weeks. He blinked. 6 weeks. 1 more shot. She slid over a manila envelope. Public defender out of Seattle. Fresh face. Name's Aisha Moreno. Darius gave a slow nod, unsure whether to feel relief or dread. Outside the window, the sky blushed pink. Somewhere in the yard, a dog barked. Not random, not feral. The sound pierced the concrete stillness, like sunlight through fog. And for the first time in years, Darius Cole allowed himself a dangerous thought. Maybe this time, things would be different. The photo was grainy but clear, a brass casing marked .38 SPL, resting near a charred wall behind the shuttered pawn shop. Aisha turned it over, in messy handwriting, still waiting where he tossed it. 2:17 a.m. She exhaled. If this is real, it could prove Vaughn was telling the truth, that the casing was removed from official records. Reverend Dawson nodded grimly. But if Price finds out we're going back there... Darius stepped forward. He already suspects. He warned us. Aisha stared at Liberty, then glanced at Darius. A dog can't trespass, right? Dawson smiled. Not unless someone follows too closely. That night, under a bruised moon, they parked near the old alley in a rusted sedan borrowed from Dawson's cousin. Liberty leapt down first, sniffing the air, tail alert. She padded toward a loose gap in the fence, just wide enough for a shepherd, and maybe 2 humans. Darius slipped through first, then helped Aisha squeeze in. Dawson stayed behind, eyes scanning the dark. The alley reeked of mildew, scorched paint, and history. Liberty zigzagged, nose to the cracked asphalt. Then she stopped, frozen, pawed at a narrow crack by the gutter. Aisha crouched. Her flashlight caught the gleam, brass, dust-covered. She snapped photos, time-stamped, angled. Gloved, she lifted the casing into a sterile vial. Liberty barked once. Then headlights. A truck idled beyond the fence. Familiar low rumble. Darius whispered, "That's Price." They turned to flee, but footsteps pounded both ends of the alley. "Go," Dawson hissed from the other side. Aisha pocketed the vial. Darius boosted her onto a stack of pallets. She scrambled over the low rooftop, dragging him after. Liberty bounded after them, silent and swift. Below, deputies kicked open the fence. The trio dropped into the next lot, sprinting past kudzu and broken glass. At the car, breathless, Aisha clutched the vial. "We have it," she whispered. "Now we just have to survive with it." As they sped away, taillights vanishing into the trees, a flicker of orange glowed behind them. Aisha twisted in her seat. "Is that—" Dawson pulled the car to a stop. Flames curled above the pawnshop's alley wall, licking the sky. "They're torching the crime scene," Darius said. His voice was low, flat. Aisha stared in disbelief. "They knew we found it. They waited until we were gone." Dawson whispered a prayer, gripping the wheel tight. But they were too late. Aisha held the vial in both hands like it might disappear. "We have the casing. We have proof." They drove the rest of the night in silence, hearts pounding too loud for words. At dawn, they arrived at Jackson State University. Inside the forensic chemistry wing, Professor Tolbert, an old friend of Warden Lynn, waited in a lab coat. She wasted no time. "I need 5 minutes with that shell." Under humming lights, she ran the residue across glass slides, watching peaks rise on the digital chromatograph. "Ammonium nitrate, diesel traces," she muttered. "Classic ANFO signature." She moved to a second test with char scraped from the casing's base. More peaks, identical pattern. "You're telling me this was from a homemade explosive?" Aisha asked. Tolbert nodded. "And it matches the debris you found in that forgotten evidence jar." She sealed the samples under vacuum, notarized the forms, and placed everything into a lockbox. "In court, this will be hard to refute." Aisha let out a shaky breath. "Unless someone stops us first." Tolbert smiled, tired. "Let them try." Outside, the sun was rising. Inside, the battle for truth was just beginning. And liberty? She sat by the lab door, calm as ever, watching, waiting. She knew. The fight wasn't over. It was finally starting to turn. By noon, Aisha filed an emergency post-trial motion with the courthouse clerk. New evidence, new analysis, direct links between explosive residue on the recovered casing and the scene of the original crime. Warden Lynn co-signed an affidavit verifying the origin of the sealed evidence. Everything was airtight, or so they thought. The clerk stamped the motion, then hesitated. "Just so you know, Sheriff Price's deputies are the ones who deliver filings to the judge. That's standard here." Aisha's stomach turned. "So you're saying the same people we're accusing carry the evidence to the judge?" The clerk shrugged, uncomfortable. "That's how it's always been." Back at the Reverend's church, the team regrouped. Liberty sat between Darius and Aisha, tail sweeping like a metronome. Hours passed. Then, at 11:22 a.m., the clerk called back. "Judge Halverson reviewed the motion. He's granting a stay hearing tomorrow morning." A fragile cheer rippled through the room. But then Aisha's phone buzzed again. A second call. From a restricted number. She answered. It was Vaughn's security detail. "Dr. Vaughn has been moved to the regional psych unit," the voice said. "Suicide attempt. She's alive, but unstable." The room fell silent. Darius stood slowly. "She's the only one who can testify that Price forced her to alter those logs." Aisha clenched her jaw. And now she might be ruled mentally unfit. Outside, Liberty whined softly and nudged Aisha's hand. She looked down at the dog. "We gain a casing. We lose a witness. It's like trading pawns in a game where he's always a move ahead." Darius nodded. "Then we stop playing his game." She reached for the yellow legal pad, drew a bold line. 49 days left. Each number was more than a countdown now. It was a declaration. This wasn't just defense. This was war. That night, Reverend Dawson's fellowship hall pulsed with activity. Volunteers printed flyers. Law students worked the phones. Social media posts spread like wildfire. But outside, the darkness crawled. Headlights loitered at the far end of the block. County cruisers parked longer than traffic patterns could explain. Aisha barely slept, curled up on a pew with Liberty beside her, the dog's steady breathing her only comfort. Twice during the night, sirens flared and quickly died out. By morning, the team was already on the road. Warden Lynn drove her SUV. Darius and Liberty rode beside Aisha. Behind them, Dawson led a small convoy of supporters in battered vans and beat-up cars. They pulled into the courthouse just as the clouds above cracked with low thunder. Inside, Judge Halverson listened in chambers, lips tight as he read the motion. Aisha stood and presented the evidence: the nitrate-laced boot soles, the forensic spectra, the charred casing, the hidden locker. Professor Tolbert spoke with the precision of a scientist and the fire of a teacher. Warden Lynn described the chase through the prison's underground tunnel. She showed alarm logs, verified timestamps. Finally, Aisha played a body cam clip from a sympathetic officer, Price's deputies charging after Liberty in the night with rifles drawn. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Then came Sheriff Price himself, smirking on the witness stand. He spun stories, claimed everything was routine, that the nitrate came from training drills, the casing a forgotten prop. Aisha countered with a memo from Lynn's late husband, proof Price never authorized any drills at all. The courtroom stirred. Halverson scribbled notes, but his expression remained unreadable. Back in their seats, Aisha whispered to Darius, "This hearing could change everything, or nothing." Liberty rested her head on his knee, and Darius, cuffed but upright, nodded once. They're not the only ones watching anymore. Just before noon, the doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. 2 U.S. Marshals escorted Dr. Ray Vaughn to the stand. Her face was pale, her eyes swollen, but she walked without help. Judge Halverson raised an eyebrow. "Dr. Vaughn, are you able to testify today?" "I am," she said quietly. Aisha exhaled, finally allowing a flicker of hope. But that hope shattered the moment Vaughn opened her mouth again. "I recant my certification," she said. "The digital logs I submitted were altered." A silence fell, like a dropped curtain. "Altered by whom?" Halverson asked. Vaughn trembled. "By me. I was coerced. Threats were made against my family." Gasps rippled through the gallery. Darius leaned forward in shock. Liberty tensed beside him, sensing the sudden storm. "Sheriff Price?" Aisha pressed. Vaughn hesitated. Then her gaze flicked across the room, to where Price stood at the back, arms crossed, eyes flat. "I can't say," she whispered. Assistant D.A. Griggs seized the moment. "Your Honor, the defense's foundation rests on falsified evidence. The casing must be excluded." "No," Aisha shot back. "The casing was found independently, guided by an anonymous tip, and confirmed by scientific testing." "But the tip referenced Vaughn's fake log," Griggs snapped. "It's fruit from a poisoned tree." Halverson rubbed his temples, visibly strained. "I have no choice. The shell casing is excluded." A low moan swept through the crowd. One juror candidate dropped their pen. Aisha's head dropped, but she caught herself. She turned to Vaughn, voice tight. "You realize perjury carries prison time." Vaughn's eyes glistened. "I know." As the court recessed, Liberty stood protectively between Darius and the aisle. Outside, the sky had turned gray, and though they had come with proof, the price of truth had just become deadly. The setback rippled through the courtroom like a dropped stone. As the gallery emptied for recess, Aisha sat in stunned silence. The casing, Their strongest weapon was gone. And Sheriff Price? He stood in the hallway, grinning like a man who had just reset the chessboard. One by one, the jurors returned from lunch. Evans, the state prosecutor, wasted no time. He filed a motion to strike Claudia James, a black schoolteacher who had voiced concern about wrongful convictions. Objection, Aisha said instantly. This is retaliation. She's being punished for speaking truth. Judge Halverson requested a race-neutral reason. Evans fumbled. Eventually, he withdrew the strike. But the damage had begun. Another black juror cited a work hardship and was dismissed. Then a Latina nurse was removed for nervous demeanor. By the end of selection, only one juror of color remained, a Choctaw elder named Mr. Tallman. Aisha leaned back, rubbing her temples. The mosaic she'd hoped for had crumbled. And yet, the trial proceeded. Opening statements began the next morning. Evans showed grainy crime scene photos, played tearful interviews with victims' relatives. He leaned hard on fear, on certainty, on guilt. Aisha countered with calm. She walked the jury through 5 previous trials, 5 reversals. This is not about tragedy, she said. This is about truth, and who controls it. She promised expert testimony, promised forensic flaws, promised more. But with the shell casing excluded and Vaughn's recantation hanging in the air, her voice carried a weight even she could feel sagging. Liberty sat beside Darius every day, alert and watchful. Her presence alone reminded the court. Someone still believed. Yet belief, Aisha knew, wasn't always enough. Not when power bent the rules, and not when justice had to claw its way through shadows to be seen. Each day of trial was a storm of cross-examinations, objections, and rising tension. Aisha challenged every fingerprint, every shaky eyewitness, every timeline stretched to fit the prosecution's narrative. But without the casing, without Vaughn's testimony, the gaps filled with doubt, and the state knew how to use that. Evans hammered emotions, tears, fear. Think of the families, he repeated, eyes wet at will. Darius sat silently beside Aisha, dressed in a navy blazer borrowed from Reverend Dawson. Liberty never left his side. She sat through each session like a sentinel of grief and loyalty. On the 3rd morning of deliberation, the jury filed back into the courtroom. The air felt thinner. The foreman, a man with red-rimmed eyes, stood. On the charge of capital murder, count 1, we find the defendant, Darius Cole, guilty. Gasps. Count 2, guilty. Count 3, guilty. Each word was a gavel strike. Each one chipped away at air, at hope. Aisha's heart pounded. One juror looked down at their lap, not meeting anyone's eyes. The judge turned to sentencing. Despite one dissenting voice, Mississippi law allowed the vote to hold. Death. Darius blinked once, then stayed still. Only Liberty moved, lifting her head to the ceiling and releasing a low, heart-shaking howl. It echoed across marble, into cameras, into lungs. Reporters fled to file headlines. Sheriff Price shook Evans's hand. Aisha wanted to scream, to throw the table, to flip the entire court on its head. Instead, she stepped in front of Darius as the deputies cuffed him. Appeal, she whispered. Supreme Court, federal, whatever it takes. Darius stared at her with calm eyes. 49 days, he murmured. That's enough time to find the truth. Then he turned and walked out, Liberty trailing beside him. Outside, thunder cracked like warning. And Aisha, she wasn't done. Not yet. The rain hit like judgment. Outside the courthouse, slogans chalked onto the sidewalk bled into rivulets, washing down the steps. Aisha stood frozen beneath the awning, soaked to the bone, Liberty pressed against her thigh. Across the square, Sheriff Price lit a cigar under the shelter of a stone arch. The ember glowed bright, almost mocking. He raised it in a slow, sarcastic salute. Aisha stared back, and something deep inside her cracked. But it wasn't defeat. It was fire. "This isn't over," she whispered. Back at Reverend Dawson's church, she dried off in the storage room they had turned into a war bunker. Charts taped to walls, folders stacked like ammo. Darius was back on death row, under tighter watch than ever. Liberty paced restlessly. Aisha reached for the yellow legal pad on the table. She drew a thick black line and wrote, 48 days. Every morning she'd mark it down. A countdown. Not to death, but to truth. They had less than 7 weeks to uncover what remained. That meant flipping witnesses, pressuring the state, digging into Sheriff Price's past with a crowbar, if needed. She began calling law schools, civil rights groups, anyone with a pulse and a spine. The first to arrive, a second year from Tulane, arms full of trial transcripts. The second, an ex-prosecutor turned whistleblower from Atlanta. By evening, the fellowship hall buzzed again. And Liberty? She lay beside the yellow legal pad, her head resting gently on Aisha's foot. Outside, the rain didn't stop, but neither did they. Not now. Not when the clock ticked louder with each passing hour. They didn't just need a miracle. They needed a plan. And a reason to believe 48 days could rewrite a verdict already carved in stone. Night fell thick over the church. Aisha barely touched her dinner. The walls of the fellowship hall, once humming with volunteers, now flickered under dim lamplight. Most had gone home. Only Liberty kept watch, tail twitching with alertness. Aisha sat surrounded by boxes, old case files, photos, court records no one bothered to read after Trial 3. Liberty suddenly stood, ears high, and padded to a cardboard box tucked in the corner. She whined. Aisha raised her head. "What is it, girl?" The German shepherd pawed at the duct-taped lid. Curious, Aisha peeled it open. Mothballs, canvas, dust. Inside lay a pair of worn patrol boots, a faded sheriff's badge stitched on the heel. Darius wasn't there, but when she sent him a photo from her phone, he called back instantly. "Those aren't standard prison boots," he said. "That's Montgomery County Sheriff's Department issue." Aisha frowned. "Lynn's husband never worked for the sheriff's office, right?" "No," Darius said. "He trained prison K-9s. That's it." Liberty pawed at the second boot and barked, twice. Aisha froze. That's her trained alert. She grabbed gloves and opened the laces. A fine yellow dust clung to the eyelets. Her breath caught. Ammonium nitrate, the same chemical that had been mysteriously absent from the original fire investigation. She texted Professor Tolbert immediately. "Need urgent test on boot residue, possible match to explosive. Confirm by tomorrow." Then she called Warden Lynn. "This boot might link Price to the fire. If we prove this belonged to him, or someone under his command, it destroys the entire prosecution theory." Lynn's voice was sharp. "Then don't wait. Get it tested now." Liberty barked once more, her mismatched eyes glowing in the lamplight. And Aisha whispered aloud, "Good girl. You just might have saved him again." Warden Lynn met Aisha just after midnight behind the prison administration wing. No sirens, no lights, just quiet tension and a ring of keys. She led Aisha and Liberty down a narrow staircase hidden beneath a rusted maintenance hatch. "After my husband died," Lynn said, voice low, "I locked away his old training materials. No one's accessed this room in years." The door creaked open to reveal a steel cage within concrete walls, labeled K-9 Practice Locker. Shelves lined with scent jars, logs, boxes sealed with prison tape faded from time, Liberty entered first, nose twitching. She darted to a dusty corner labeled arson, explosives. Then she froze. One paw tapped a jar. Aisha reached out, heart racing. Inside was a charred sliver of 2x4 wood. A tag read, Pawn Shop, July 18th, sample AR-12. She blinked. Trial records listed only 9 samples. This is the 12th. Unlogged, Lynn whispered. Hidden. Aisha opened the lid just enough to catch the acrid scent. Yellow specks clung to the wood. Same signature, she muttered. This ties the fire to a blast, not an accident. And this was never turned over in court. Then, an alarm. A shrill, metallic whoop echoed down the corridor. Lynn's face snapped toward the door. Perimeter sensor. Someone tripped the motion alarm. They heard boots on gravel. Fast, heavy. Go, Lynn hissed. North stairwell, I'll block the path. Aisha shoved the evidence jar and the nitrate-stained boots into a duffel bag. Liberty circled protectively. Behind them, flashlights pierced the dark. Aisha slid into an old laundry chute, burlap dust stinging her eyes. Liberty followed without hesitation. They landed in a long-abandoned infirmary. Silence. For now. Lynn slammed the chute shut behind them, locking it. We've got maybe 5 minutes, she panted. After that, Price will know exactly what we're carrying. And in Aisha's arms, the truth vibrated like contraband lightning. The rental car trembled as it rumbled past the last gas station before the state prison gates. Aisha Moreno gripped the wheel tighter. She'd left Seattle with 3 hours' notice, still wearing her public defender badge, like it meant something this far south. In the passenger seat, her laptop hummed, decorated with stickers that read, "Justice is a verb," and "Free the innocent." The back seat held only one suitcase and a stack of manila folders that felt heavier than law school ever had. She rehearsed in the mirror at a stoplight. "Mr. Cole, I'm your new attorney, court-appointed but committed." She tried a smile. It didn't reach her eyes. The guard at the checkpoint checked her ID, glanced at his list. "Booth C. They're allowing the therapy dog today. You allergic?" She blinked. Number I love dogs. Her mind flashed to the shelters she rotated through as a kid in foster care. Shy mutts with eyes like secrets. Inside visitation, the lights buzzed overhead. A glass partition separated her from the room where Darius waited, shackled to a steel loop in the floor. But it wasn't him that made her pause. It was the dog. A German shepherd, alert but serene, sat beside the warden. When Aisha entered, the dog's tail gave one soft thump, then stillness as if professionalism applied to canines too. Darius looked up. His expression, worn but gentle, shifted when he saw the dog. Something softened. "Mr. Cole," Aisha began, sitting down. "I'm Aisha Moreno, your new counsel." He couldn't shake her hand, so she laid her palm flat on the table in offering. He touched it lightly. "Call me Darius," he said, "and that's Liberty." The dog's ears perked at her name. "She remembers everyone," he added, voice a calm baritone, "especially the ones who tried." Aisha nodded. She hadn't tried anything yet, but maybe, just maybe, this was the start. They didn't wait. Aisha, Warden Lynn, Darius, recently released to Lynn's custody, and Liberty, burst through the emergency exit at the back of the infirmary. Red strobes flickered behind them as sirens began to wail. "This way," Lynn ordered, keys rattling. "We'll never outrun them in the yard, but if we make it to the car, we have a chance." Liberty ran ahead, leading through the shadows like she knew the path better than any human. Darius clutched the duffel tight. Inside, a nitrate-dusted boot, an unregistered char sample, and maybe the last chance he'd ever have. They reached Lynn's black SUV just as guards began flooding the yard with flashlights and radios. As they tore down the road, Aisha braced herself in the back seat. "They'll send units after us." "Let them," Lynn growled. "We're going straight to Jackson State. I have a favor to call in." 30 minutes later, they skidded into a back lot behind the university's forensic lab. Waiting at the loading dock, Professor Tolbert, coat already on, gloves pulled tight. "No time to explain?" she asked. "None," Aisha said, handing her the duffel. Under fluorescent lights, Tolbert moved with machine precision. She scraped residue from the boot, dropped it into a GCMS analyzer. Then she chipped a fragment from the charred wood. Same process. The screen blinked. Spikes, peaks, identical matches. Ammonium nitrate, diesel additive, PEG traces used in commercial detonators. These samples were at the center of an explosive blast. She turned to them, voice hard. "They said there was no bomb. They lied." Tolbert notarized the results, sealed the evidence bags, and printed the lab reports. "Now go," she said, "before someone follows you here." Outside, Liberty let out a sharp bark, and Aisha knew the chase wasn't over. But for the first time, they were running with the truth in their hands, not just from the fire, but toward justice. At dawn, Aisha filed the motion. New forensic evidence, explosive residue, suppressed samples, a sworn affidavit from Warden Lynn. It was all there. The courthouse clerk rubber-stamped the documents, but her hand trembled. "Be careful," she said quietly. "Sheriff Price's office still handles transport to the judge, rural protocol." Aisha's stomach dropped. "They control the delivery?" The clerk nodded. "I'll mark it urgent, but I can't promise when it'll get there." Aisha left the courthouse with the weight of truth and the fragility of the system pressing against her lungs. Back at Reverend Dawson's church, the team waited in a loose circle around folding tables. Liberty curled beneath the legal pad now marked 47 days. They had filed. They had evidence. But would the judge ever see it? Professor Tolbert called at 9:43 a.m. "They broke in," she said. "My lab was ransacked. Hard drives gone. Gas line cut." Aisha's throat went dry. "Are you okay?" "I'm safe. A couple adjuncts arrived early. Scared them off." A pause. "But whoever did it, they knew where to look." Aisha hung up slowly. The timing was no coincidence. Sheriff Price wasn't just reacting. He was striking. Minutes later, the clerk called again. "Judge Halverson read your motion. Emergency hearing scheduled. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. The room exhaled in collective relief. Then she added, voice shaking. "Price submitted a counter-affidavit. Claims Warden Lynn faked the break-in. Filed internal affairs charges. Lynn didn't flinch. Let them come." But Aisha's phone buzzed again, this time from the marshal assigned to Dr. Vaughn. She answered, heart pounding. "Dr. Vaughn attempted suicide overnight. She's alive, but they've moved her to the regional psychiatric ward. Might not be able to testify." Aisha stared at the ceiling. One step forward, one step back. Liberty nudged her knee. "We're not done," Aisha whispered. "We just need one more break." That night, the church felt more like a fortress than a sanctuary. Volunteers kept watch at the windows. Reverend Dawson organized shifts. Liberty paced restlessly, ears twitching at every creak of the floorboards. Outside, county cruisers lingered longer than passing traffic required. One sat parked across the street for over an hour. Aisha barely slept. When she did, she dreamt of ash and fire. The next morning, dawn cracked gray and angry. Clouds rolled over the delta like bruises. At 7 a.m., the convoy formed again. Lynn's SUV carried Aisha, Darius, and Liberty. Reverend Dawson followed with local supporters. Professor Tolbert brought a sealed lockbox and printed chromatograms. By 8:15, they arrived at the courthouse. News vans lined the sidewalk. Protesters held signs that read, "Retrial now," and "Truth can't burn." Inside chambers, Judge Halverson's expression was carved from granite. Aisha led with the boot, nitrate dust, training logs, the timeline. Tolbert testified crisply. Ammonium nitrate, diesel accelerants, traces of PEG from detonator cords. These samples came from a blast zone. Warden Lynn described the hidden locker, the night chase, the emergency extraction. She submitted body cam footage from one sympathetic officer, deputies with rifles drawn, chasing Liberty and the team. Then Sheriff Price took the stand. Hair slicked, words honeyed. He claimed the boots were old props, the charred sample a misfiled artifact. "That locker hasn't been touched in years," Aisha said. "And yet someone set off an alarm just hours after we opened it." Price shrugged. "Coincidence." Aisha stepped closer. "Why does your phone ping a tower near the crime scene 6 minutes after the fire started?" The room hushed. Judge Halverson's brow furrowed. Outside, thunder boomed over the courthouse roof. Whatever came next, the storm wasn't just in the sky anymore. It had entered the courtroom. Judge Halverson called for a recess, but no one left the room. Not really. They just stood there, eyes fixed on Sheriff Price, who now looked like a man feeling the noose tug. Aisha returned to her seat, heart thudding. Liberty lay beside her, head lifted, alert. Tolbert leaned in. "You didn't tell me about the cell tower." Aisha shook her head. "Wasn't sure until this morning. Lynn pulled the metadata herself. We held it for the right moment." Reverend Dawson whispered from behind. "The gallery's turning. You can feel it." And he was right. People had come expecting another doomed appeal, but what they'd seen was doubt. Real, solid, reasonable doubt. When the judge returned, he looked exhausted, but clearer somehow. "I've reviewed the forensic evidence. The explosive residue contradicts original findings. The sample was never disclosed. That alone warrants concern." He paused, then added, "And the sheriff's proximity to the scene, minutes after the fire, without report or record, is deeply troubling." Price shifted in his seat. "I'm issuing a stay of execution pending full evidentiary review," Halverson said. "Darius Cole is to be removed from death row immediately and transferred to county holding." Gasps, cries. Aisha closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them again. Liberty nudged her thigh, tail sweeping once. It wasn't freedom, not yet, but it was a crack in the wall. Outside, the protesters erupted in cheers. Inside, Price muttered to his lawyer, but his confidence had thinned. Aisha stood and faced him. "You built a case on silence, burned every truth that stood in your way. But not this one." She looked to the judge. "We're not just fighting for Darius anymore. We're fighting to expose how many others were buried in that same ash." And for the first time, the system seemed ready to listen. The transfer happened at dusk. Darius stepped out of the prison van without shackles, Liberty walking beside him like a silent oath kept. Dozens gathered outside county holding, candles in hand. Some were strangers, some were families who'd once testified in fear, but now returned in solidarity. Inside, the holding cell was quiet, clean, no bars, no cement cot, just a small bench and a table. "I've never had this much room in 20 years, Darius said with a half smile. Aisha set the new case files on the table. "You won't be in here long." She meant it. because the stay wasn't just a pause, it was a doorway, and she planned to kick it wide open. They began re-interviewing every witness from the original trial. Some had moved away, others refused to talk. But one, Maria Garza, a former jailhouse cook, agreed to meet. They found her in a trailer park outside Yazoo City. She cracked open a beer, sat on the porch, and said, "That boy didn't set no fire." Back then, I told the deputy I saw Sheriff Price's truck leave that alley 10 minutes before it lit up. Aisha leaned forward. "You told someone?" "Sure did. Deputy Lantham. He wrote it down. Next thing I knew, I was reassigned to laundry and told to watch my mouth." Garza pulled a faded notebook from under her seat, but I kept my own copy. Inside, a page with names, times, vehicle tags, including prices. Aisha scanned the entry. This puts him at the scene and contradicts sworn testimony. Maria lit a cigarette. "Honey, everything around here's been burning a long time. You just finally smelled the smoke." Back in the car, Aisha stared at the notebook and whispered, "We have enough to bury him." Liberty barked once, sharp and clear. It was time. Aisha didn't sleep. She spent the night connecting dots across decades, tracking old arson reports, cross-referencing deputies promoted after sealed investigations, mapping out a legacy of silence built under Sheriff Price's name. By sunrise, the walls of the church were a war map again. Red string, photos, burned addresses. At the center, Vaughn's name circled in blue. She was still at the psychiatric ward, but this time when Aisha called, she answered. "I wasn't trying to die," Vaughn said softly. "I just couldn't carry it anymore." "You don't have to," Aisha told her. "Not alone." An hour later, they sat across from each other in the hospital's garden. Vaughn looked older, like the guilt had aged her 5 years in 5 days. She pulled a folded letter from her pocket. "I wrote this to the Bar Association. I'm turning in my license." Aisha didn't reach for it. "I'm not here for your license. I'm here for the truth." Vaughn nodded. "The day I buried that bullet casing, I did it because I knew what it meant." She took a breath. "I'd been sleeping with Price. He gave me my first job out of law school, said he'd protect my future if I stayed loyal." Aisha said nothing. "I found that casing in a bag Price left in my garage. It had blood on it. I ran the test. It matched the victim. That meant Darius couldn't have done it." Her voice cracked. "But Price said if I turned it in, I'd lose everything. So I buried it." Aisha leaned forward. "Would you say that in court?" Vaughn's hands trembled. "If it saves him, I will." Aisha stood. "Then let's go save him." Behind them, Liberty pressed her paw against the garden gate, ready to move. And somewhere in the still morning air, the old order began to tremble. The courthouse buzzed like a hornet's nest. Word had spread. Aisha was filing a motion to vacate the conviction. Not a delay, not a stay, a full-scale reversal. By 10 a.m., the line outside stretched around the block. Inside, Aisha stood before the same clerk as before, but this time her hands didn't shake. She handed over a thick file, affidavits, lab results, Maria Garza's notebook, Vaughn's signed confession, chain of custody breakdowns, a timeline cross-referenced down to the second. 3 separate Brady violations, Aisha said, each one enough to overturn. Together, they bury the state's case. The clerk blinked. "This'll go straight to the judge." "Good." Back at County Holding, Darius waited in the interview room. Liberty pressed against his side, calm. "They're scared now," he said, reading her face. "They should be," Aisha replied. "They built a cage out of lies, We just cut through the bars. At 3 p.m., the emergency hearing was called. Judge Halverson looked tired, but alert. Price didn't show. His lawyer claimed medical leave. Vaughn did. She stood shakily, but spoke with fire. I withheld evidence that proved Darius Cole's innocence. I was complicit in his conviction, and I'm ready to testify under oath. Halverson listened, took notes, then turned to the court. Given the overwhelming new evidence, I am granting the motion to vacate. The gallery burst into cheers. Darius closed his eyes and for a second just breathed. But the judge raised a hand. I am not dismissing the charges, not yet. The state has 30 days to refile or drop the case. Aisha nodded. Expected. But outside, as she walked down the courthouse steps with Darius beside her, no cuffs, no guards, just liberty leading the way. It wasn't a delay that filled her chest. It was freedom. First taste, real, earned, and unstoppable. Darius stepped into sunlight. Not yard time, not fenced. Real sun, on real pavement, with no chains around his wrists. He blinked at the sky like it might vanish. It's bigger than I remember, he whispered. Liberty pressed against his leg, tail sweeping low and steady. Reverend Dawson waited on the church steps with open arms. No welcome speech, he said, just a key to the side room, fresh sheets, and peach cobbler. Darius smiled for the first time in years. Peach cobbler? From scratch. That night, the fellowship hall turned into a celebration. There was no press, no podiums, just folding chairs, plastic plates, and gospel humming from the old speaker. Maria Garza came. So did Tolbert and Lynn. Even Vaughn arrived, head bowed, sitting in the back. But Darius walked to her, offered his hand. I don't hate you, he said. I just wish you'd come sooner. She nodded, tears streaking her cheeks. Later, Aisha sat outside on the steps. The stars were out, soft, scattered, the kind you miss behind prison walls. Darius joined her. You know it's not over, right? I know, she said. They could refile, spin it, delay again. He looked toward the trees. But they'll never put me back in that box, not without a fight. No, Aisha said, smiling. They won't. She pulled out her notebook. We've got a list now. 3 other cases with missing evidence. Same district. Same DA. Darius chuckled. You're building a fire of your own, huh? Just lighting a match, she said. Liberty curled at their feet. And for the first time in 2 decades, Darius Cole slept in a room without bars. Because justice hadn't just cracked the door open, it was walking right through it. The warrant came on a Thursday, signed by a federal judge. A dozen agents arrived before dawn. Quiet, surgical. Sheriff Price was still in his bathrobe when they entered. What's this about? He barked. But they already had the hard drives, the burner phones, the safe behind the bookshelf. Inside, sealed envelopes marked witness transfers, bundles of cash, a flash drive labeled Darius. At the same time, Aisha sat in a D.C. conference room across from 2 U.S. attorneys. She placed Maria's notebook, Vaughn's letter, and the lab reports on the table. This isn't about one wrongful conviction, she said. It's a system. Price wasn't just negligent. He built a machine that ate the innocent and rewarded the complicit. They nodded. Quiet, calculating. We've started a formal inquiry, one said. If you're willing, we'd like you to serve as lead investigative liaison. Aisha blinked. Me? You broke this case wide open. You're not just a defense lawyer anymore. She thought of Darius, of Liberty, of every inmate still buried under bad evidence. She nodded. Then let's keep digging. Back in Mississippi, news spread like wildfire. Sheriff indicted on 19 counts, read one headline. A pattern of misconduct, says DOJ, said another. And in the middle of it all, Liberty, now retired from active duty, but still sharp-eyed, sitting beside Darius on his porch swing, like she was guarding a legacy. Aisha visited that evening, holding fresh files. "You ready to help free the next one?" she asked. Darius smiled, tapping the notebook in his lap, already started reading. Because one truth, uncovered, didn't just end a lie. It lit a fuse. And across the South, others were beginning to spark. The church hallway was quiet, but not empty. On its longest wall, sheets of paper had been taped in careful rows, each one bearing a name. Some were typed, others handwritten. A few just nicknames, scrawled in block letters. Each name belonged to someone once convicted in Sheriff Price's jurisdiction. Some were free, some were still inside, some were already gone. Aisha stood before the wall with a red marker. Today, she circled 3 names. "New affidavits," she said, "from a former court clerk. Same missing lab reports, same prosecutor." Darius walked up behind her. "They said justice is blind, but it sure sees color." Aisha nodded. "It sees poverty, it sees silence, and it counts on both." They were building a task force now, federal backing, regional outreach. Lynn had joined full-time. Tolbert ran the forensic review unit. Vaughn, stripped of her license, now worked behind the scenes, helping organize case files, hunting down buried transcripts. Even Maria Garza stopped by weekly with old cook logs and whispered names she remembered from meal deliveries and court hearing days. The wall kept growing, and so did the hope. Liberty, now with silver around her muzzle, still made her rounds. She visited each new exoneree who walked through Dawson's doors. To them, she wasn't just a dog. She was the first to believe. One man, released after 14 years, got on his knees and hugged her, sobbing. "She's why I kept going," he said. "I saw her in the news. Thought, if that dog won't quit, neither will I." Aisha watched it all, and for the first time since this began, she allowed herself to feel it. Not just the relief, but the rising. Because the wall of names wasn't a memorial. It was a battleground, and they were winning. Aisha opened her laptop and flipped through a stack of color-coded notes. "I've gone through all 5 prior trial transcripts," she said. "Same prosecutor, same sheriff, same pattern." She slid a highlighted page toward Darius. Across 5 trials, the state struck 39 out of 40 black jurors. That's not strategy. That's discrimination. Darius raised his eyebrows. They saw those numbers before. Didn't matter. "That's because they only looked at them 1 trial at a time. I'm filing under Flowers versus Mississippi. Separate trials can still show a single discriminatory scheme." He nodded slowly, but something in his expression warned her. He'd seen belief collapse before. "Look at this," she continued, pulling up a satellite image. "The star witness says she saw you near the store 10 minutes before the shooting, but her porch is 3 blocks away, and there's a church blocking her view." Darius gave a tired chuckle. "She changed her story in trial 3. Nobody blinked." "I did," Aisha said. Then she paused, lowering her voice. "I don't just want reasonable doubt. I want to prove they built this whole case on sand." Liberty, the German shepherd, laid her head gently on Darius's lap. He scratched behind her ears without looking. "Doubt didn't save me last time," he murmured. "Then we don't aim for doubt," Aisha said. "We aim for truth." She tapped the screen again. "Someone tipped me anonymously. Said there was a 7th shell casing found behind the store. Never logged. Never entered into evidence." Darius leaned forward. "You believe it?" "I believe it enough to check." A flicker of something passed between them. hope, or maybe just shared exhaustion. "You're serious about this," he said. Aisha nodded. "I didn't come all this way to watch you die, Mr. Cole." He looked down at Liberty. "Then let's start digging." The courtroom was packed again, but this time the seats weren't filled with spectators. They were filled with survivors. 32 of them. Men and women wrongfully convicted, wrongfully charged, wrongfully erased. Some had spent a year behind bars, others decades. And today, they came not for a trial, but for a reckoning. Aisha stood before the State Judicial Review Board, her hands resting on a binder, thick with sealed files, letters, affidavits, forensic reports. "This is not just about Sheriff Price," she began. "This is about every DA who turned away, every judge who rubber-stamped, every investigator who lost the file." She turned, gesturing to the people seated behind her. These lives weren't just disrupted, they were erased, and until this board acknowledges its complicity, it will keep happening. One board member cleared her throat. "Miss Jordan, are you suggesting systemic corruption?" "No," Aisha replied. "I'm proving it." She clicked the remote. On the screen behind her appeared a timeline. Years of convictions clustered under Price's reign, with red marks for each case overturned, under review, or proven tainted. Dozens. Then a map. 3 counties, 1 sheriff's office, 1 laboratory, 1 DA's office, and hundreds of lives. Aisha looked each board member in the eye. "You don't have to choose shame. You can choose justice." Silence. Then the board chair leaned forward. "We are opening a formal statewide investigation, effective immediately." Gasps, applause, tears. Later, Darius found Aisha outside, staring up at the state capitol building. "You really did it," he said. She shook her head. "We did, and it's not over." He smiled. "Good, because I've got names to add to that wall." And together, they walked into the next chapter. Not just fighting to fix what was broken, but to build something no one could burn again. The morning was golden. Sunlight poured through the stained glass windows of the church, scattering color across the floor. Liberty lay in her favorite spot, beneath the front pew, head resting on her paws, eyes half closed, but always alert. She was older now. Her steps slower, but her presence hadn't faded. Everyone knew Liberty was the soul of this fight. That week she'd visited 3 newly freed men, let each one stroke her head, whisper thanks, cry into her fur. She never flinched, but today she didn't rise when the door opened. Darius noticed first. He knelt beside her, gently ran a hand along her side. "She's tired," he said softly. Aisha sat on the floor next to them. "She's earned it." The vet came later that afternoon. There was no emergency, just peace. "She's held on longer than most," the vet said, kneeling. "Dogs like this. They don't let go until they know the work is done." Liberty blinked once, then closed her eyes. Aisha held her paw. Darius stroked her ear. Reverend Dawson lit a candle. No one spoke. They didn't have to. Liberty passed quietly, without pain. The next morning they buried her under the oak tree behind the church. No tombstone, just a bronze plaque. Liberty, she believed in innocence. That night, Aisha placed Liberty's collar above the wall of names, and for the first time in a long while she cried. Not out of grief, but out of gratitude. Because Liberty hadn't just been a dog. She'd been the heartbeat of a revolution. And though her body was gone, her legacy padded on, in every name cleared, every lie exposed, and every person who stood up and said, "I believe you. Let's prove it." The envelope was thin. No return address. But Aisha recognized the handwriting before she even opened it. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper, faint creases, careful pen strokes. Dear Aisha, I heard about Liberty. I'm sorry I never got to meet her. I'd seen her on the news. Sometimes I pretended she'd come for me next. I wanted to say thank you. You don't know me, but I know what you did for Darius Cole. My name is Vincent Barlow. I'm in Angola. Been here 23 years for something I didn't do. My public defender never showed to trial. No appeal, no options. But I saw your story on a broken TV in the common room. That was the first night I slept straight through in 5 years. Because if someone like you is out there, maybe someone like me still has a shot. If this letter finds you, I'd be honored if you read my case. If not, just know you gave me one more day with hope. That's more than anyone's given me in a long time. Vincent Aisha folded the letter slowly, then turned to her desk, pulled a file from her bottom drawer labeled Incoming Review. She slid the letter inside, then picked up her pen. Outside, the sun filtered through the blinds in soft gold. The wall of names waited, and though Liberty was gone, her spirit lingered. In every envelope, every cry for help, every name scratched into forgotten court records. Aisha whispered to herself, one more story, one more truth, and began to read. Vincent Barlow's file arrived 3 days later. Aisha opened it at dawn, coffee in hand, heart steady. First glance, a textbook railroading. Arrested at 19, accused of armed robbery. No fingerprints, no DNA, no eyewitness who saw his face. Just a vague tip from a man later found guilty of perjury in 2 other cases. His public defender had filed no motions, no appeal. The transcript was a horror story of apathy, but one note caught her attention. Evidence box number 4478, misplaced, status unknown. She circled it, checked the chain of custody sheet. It had never reached the evidence room. 2 phone calls and 1 favor later, she was staring at a dusty cardboard box in the back of an old storage locker. Inside, a security cam tape no one had reviewed. It took 3 hours to find a working VCR. She slid the tape in. Black and white footage flickered. The robbery scene, a liquor store. The suspect entered, tall, thin, wearing a hoodie. But as he turned, the screen froze. The man had a tattoo on his neck, a spider. Vincent Barlow had no tattoos. Not then, not now. Aisha called Darius. You need to see this. They watched together. Darius leaned forward. That's not him. Not even close. She nodded. And they never showed this in court. They pretended it didn't exist. By evening, she'd contacted the Innocence Network, a new forensic team, and the state's Special Conviction Integrity Unit. And as she added Vincent Barlow's name to the wall, she didn't use red marker. She used green. A new color. One for cases reopened, truths uncovered, and lives about to be reclaimed. The hearing for Vincent Barlow was held in a small courtroom. No marble columns, no cameras. Just benches that creaked, a judge with tired eyes, and one man in a prison jumpsuit brought in shackled, though he no longer needed to be. Vincent looked older than 42. His hair was mostly gray, but his eyes, sharp, focused, hopeful. Aisha stood beside him. She'd spent weeks rebuilding the case file, piecing together what should have been obvious. The unrevealed tape, the misfiled evidence, the tipster's history of lying for leniency, the absence of basic defense. It was enough to shake the walls. I wasn't even in the county that night, Vincent said softly into the microphone. But no one wanted to check. Judge Lindstrom reviewed the new findings slowly, carefully. Then he looked up. Mr. Barlow, he said, On the basis of this new evidence and failure of adequate counsel, this court hereby vacates your conviction." Vincent didn't react. Not at first. Then Aisha reached for his shoulder. "You're free," she whispered. And suddenly, it hit him. He doubled over, not crying, sobbing. 23 years collapsed in one moment. The guards unlocked the cuffs, and as Vincent stood, shaking, stunned, the door opened. Darius entered with a jacket in his arms. "For you," he said, draping it over Vincent's shoulders. "You'll get cold. Freedom's got a breeze." The courtroom chuckled. Later that evening, Aisha added Vincent's name to the wall again, this time in bold black marker. Next to it, a small note. Home. Because he wasn't just another case. He was a reminder that behind every file, every faded court document, was a person waiting to live again. And now, one more did. It started as a quiet morning. Aisha walked into the church, coffee in hand, planning to catch up on files. But something stopped her. The hallway was humming. Dozens of people filled the space, staring at the long wall of names, some whispering, some crying, others just standing silently, as if in a museum of truth. But it wasn't just the wall anymore. Someone had begun painting around it. Soft green vines curling between the names, golden light breaking through clouds at the corners. And at the center, where Liberty's collar once hung, a mural had taken shape. It showed a woman kneeling with a dog at her side, facing a crowd of faceless figures. Behind them, a city of locked doors. In the painting, the doors were open. Reverend Dawson appeared at her side. "One of the exonerees painted it," he said the wall needed to breathe. Aisha smiled, eyes wet. "It's not a wall anymore." "No," he agreed. "It's a window to what comes next." That afternoon, children from the community came in for their first legal education workshop. They sat cross-legged beneath the mural, listening to Darius explain what due process meant, how to ask questions in court, how to know their rights. Outside, Vincent Barlow stood under the oak tree, reading the plaque for Liberty. He touched the metal gently. "She got me home," he said. Aisha returned to her desk. New letters waited, new names. She picked up her pen, not with weariness, but with certainty, because the movement wasn't slowing. It was expanding, case by case, name by name, light through every crack, until no cell, no lie, and no silence could hold back the truth again. The guard tapped on the glass. 15 minutes. Aisha closed her laptop and gathered the documents. "I'm driving to the alley right after this. If there's anything left behind that fence, I'm going to find it." Darius watched her carefully. "That alley's been fenced since the first trial. Sheriff Price had it locked down, said it was to preserve the crime scene." She smirked. "Fences work both ways. They preserve what's hidden too." He leaned back, chains clinking faintly. "Miss Moreno, why do you take this case? Everyone calls it cursed." She looked him in the eye. "Because it's not over. Because you're still here. And if you're still here, the story isn't finished." Before he could respond, he lowered his voice. "Someone threatened me this morning, whispered through my cell door, said I wouldn't live to see this trial." Aisha froze. "Did you recognize the voice?" "Number." "But they knew my name. And the way they said it. It wasn't a bluff." She scribbled a quick note. "I'll notify Warden Lynn. We'll get security tightened." He glanced down at Liberty, who now rested beside him, ears alert. "Just keep her safe. I can take what's coming." Liberty gave a quiet whine, sensing the tension. Aisha offered a small smile. "She's not going anywhere." The guard returned, clicking the chain back into Darius's waist restraint. As they led him away, Liberty walked beside him with the grace of a soldier. Aisha stayed seated, heart pounding. She'd known this case would be tough, but now she felt the ground shifting beneath her. This wasn't just about courtrooms anymore. Someone wanted this buried, deep, and Darius Cole was running out of time. Later that afternoon, the prison gates groaned open again, not for release, but for demonstration. Darius found himself back in cuffs, escorted across the yard with Liberty at his side, and Warden Lynn walking just ahead. "This won't take long," Lynn said under her breath, clipping a lead to Liberty's collar. Sheriff Price requested proof of Liberty's scent-tracking reliability before court admits any canine evidence. Darius arched a brow. He's worried she'll sniff out something he'd rather leave buried. Lynn almost smiled. Exactly. They approached an aging white van, parked near the old evidence room. Sheriff Price leaned against the fender, arms crossed, hat tipped just enough to shadow his eyes. Two deputies stood nearby, watching like statues. "Afternoon, Warden," Price said. "Brought your little mutt." "She's a certified therapy and scent dog," Lynn replied. "You asked for a demonstration. We're giving one." The van doors opened. Inside were 3 sealed metal boxes. "We took swabs from the pistol used in the original case," Price said. "Let's see if your dog can find the right one." Darius's shackled hands received a neutral scent cloth from Lynn. Liberty sniffed it carefully. Then she was off. She moved box to box, pausing, sneezing, passing. On the 3rd box she froze. One low bark. Her tail thumped. "That's her signal," Darius said softly. "She's sure." Price's jaw tightened. "Coincidence?" "Science," Lynn replied. "She's tested at 98% accuracy." The sheriff sneered. "You think a dog will sway a jury?" "If truth doesn't scare you, it shouldn't matter," Darius said. A deputy leaned in and whispered to Price. The sheriff's eyes narrowed. He turned slowly. "Your motion for jury pattern got denied this morning." Darius's heart sank. Lynn's expression froze. Price tipped his hat again. "See you in 6 weeks, with or without your miracle dog." As he walked away, Liberty bristled. Darius held her steady, but inside, his resolve was boiling. Liberty's bark echoed in Darius's mind long after the demonstration ended. Back in his cell, he paced, the chains on his ankles clinking against the floor. But his thoughts weren't on court filings. They were on Aisha. She'd left hours ago to investigate the alley behind the store. And Sheriff Price's parting words felt more like a threat than a statement. That threat turned real just before dusk. A guard sprinted down the corridor, breathless. "Warden Lynn, County Dispatch just called. Your lawyer, Moreno. She's been in a crash." Darius froze. "Is she alive?" "Stable, they say. But she's asking for the dog, over and over." Lynn's expression darkened. "Unchain him. Waist restraints only. We're going to the hospital now." The prison van screamed down Highway 17, sirens flashing. Liberty sat pressed against Darius's leg, sensing every curve, every jolt. At Magnolia County General, paramedics wheeled Aisha into Trauma Room 2. Her face was bruised, neck in a brace, eyes fluttering. But when Liberty barked, Aisha stirred. "She's here," she whispered hoarsely. "Thank God." Lynn flashed her badge. "Service dog and legal counsel. We stay." Inside the harshly lit room, Aisha fought for breath. "Black pickup. Chased me. Forced me off the road. No license plate." Darius's jaw clenched. "Did you see the driver?" "Number but... Doctor." "Ray Vaughn called me. Said she found chain of custody errors. Told me to meet her at the morgue. Never made it. Phone's gone." Darius reached out, shackles clicking. Liberty rose onto her hind legs, licking Aisha's hand. Lynn turned to the guard. "Prep the van again. We're going to the county morgue, now." Darius met her eyes. If someone tried to silence Aisha, we need to know who and what they were so desperate to hide. Liberty let out a low growl, and they all knew. The game had changed. The county morgue sat beneath the courthouse, like a forgotten bunker. Cold, sterile, humming with fluorescent light. Warden Lynn's ID badge buzzed them through 2 steel doors. Darius, still cuffed at the waist, walked beside Liberty, who stayed glued to his side like a shadow made of fur and instinct. Dr. Ray Vaughn, the forensic consultant, waited in Autopsy Room C. Tall, composed, her blonde hair tied tight. She raised a brow at the unusual trio. "Unexpected entourage," she said dryly. Lynn's reply was sharp. "Moreno was hit in what looks like a targeted vehicle strike. You were her last call." Vaughn sighed. "I contacted her because I discovered something troubling in the chain of custody for the casings from the crime scene." She turned her tablet around. Digital logs show 7 shell casings were logged into evidence, but only 6 appear in the lab's final analysis. Darius stepped forward. The 7th shell vanished, and the timestamp on the entry log was altered, 2 hours after it was filed. Warden Lynn's eyes narrowed. "Can you testify to that?" Vaughn hesitated. "Digital evidence can be attacked in court. I'd need the original chain logs. Sheriff Price controls that archive." Liberty let out a low, uneasy growl. Something in Vaughn's body language shifted. Her shoulders stiffened, eyes flicked away. Darius stepped closer. "If you thought the tip about the casing was a dead end, why reach out to Moreno at all?" Vaughn's lips thinned. "Because she would have wasted time chasing it? Or because you knew someone might intercept her?" Lynn asked, voice cold. A long silence followed. Then Lynn snapped. "Download those logs. Print certified copies. You're coming with us to file a judicial preservation order, tonight." Vaughn gave a slow nod and turned toward the printer. Outside, Liberty tensed. She could feel it too. Something in this morgue wasn't right. Not yet. The printer hummed, spitting out pages of certified logs while Dr. Vaughn inserted a USB drive into her tablet. Darius stood nearby, Liberty pressed to his leg, ears swiveling at every faint sound. Warden Lynn paced beside the exam table, arms crossed, eyes locked on Vaughn. Suddenly, the printer jammed. "Damn thing," Vaughn muttered, flipping open the back panel. A metallic clink hit the floor. Liberty lunged, teeth clamped down gently on a small silver object, a micro drive the size of a fingernail. She trotted to Darius and dropped it into his palm. He turned it over. "What's this? Redundant backup or delete key?" Vaughn's face drained of color. Warden Lynn didn't hesitate. She pulled her sidearm. "Hands where I can see them." I just safeguard my research," Vaughn stammered. "Back away," Lynn snapped. Darius slipped the drive into his pocket. Liberty stayed between him and the doctor, growling low. They were halfway to the door when Vaughn's voice trembled out behind them. "He'll kill me if that leaks." Lynn froze. "Who?" But Vaughn didn't answer. Moments later, Deputy Wilkes burst through the corridor panting. "Warden, hospital security just reported someone dressed as maintenance tried to enter Moreno's room. He fled before they could catch him." Lynn's eyes snapped to Vaughn. "Friend of yours?" She shook her head, speechless. Lynn holstered her gun and barked orders. "Wilkes, escort Dr. Vaughn to protective custody. We'll question her later." She turned to Darius. "You and I are heading to County IT. We clone this drive now. Your attorney's life may depend on what's inside." As they strode toward the elevator, Liberty's leash taut between them, Darius gripped the microdrive tighter. Something on that sliver of silicon had already drawn blood, and it might be the only card they had left. 2 weeks later, The courthouse buzzed like a hive on trial day. Reporters clogged the lobby. Protesters shouted slogans outside the gates. Inside courtroom 2A, Judge Helms, stoic and silver-haired, called the hearing to order. Aisha Moreno sat beside Darius at the defense table, her arms still in a sling, face bruised but eyes burning with focus. Liberty lay at Darius's feet, calm in her service vest, eyes scanning the room like a sentinel. The motion before the court, whether to consider a history of racial bias in jury selection. Assistant D. A. Griggs tried first. Your Honor, each trial must stand on its own. Prior patterns are irrelevant. Aisha rose. That's not what Flowers v. Mississippi says. 5 trials, 39 of 40 black jurors struck. Same prosecutor, same sheriff. That's a pattern. She clicked a remote. Screens lit up with color-coded graphs and strike logs. Judge Helms nodded slowly. I will allow a Batson hearing. Minimum juror diversity must be met, or the state risks a mistrial. A burst of applause erupted in the gallery. Outside, Sheriff Price stood by the water cooler with his deputies. His eyes didn't leave Aisha. Congratulations, he drawled when she stepped into the hallway. Not that it'll matter. The evidence will bury him again. She didn't blink. Evidence we haven't seen, or evidence you tampered with? He smiled without humor. Careful now. Night roads get slippery. Darius stepped up beside her. Liberty growled low. Price's deputies reached for their belts. Judge Helms's clerk appeared, breaking the standoff. Price tipped his hat and walked off, the smirk never leaving his face. That night, Aisha stood before a packed church sanctuary, with Reverend Dawson at her side. We need more than justice, she told the crowd. We need the truth. Then Dawson handed her an envelope. Found this in my mailbox, he said. Inside, a Polaroid, a shell casing beside a scorched brick wall. The timestamp, 7 days ago. The note, still waiting where he tossed it.